Last week we had read by the Makkah of Arba, the locust. Paro says to Moshe that ki ro neged penechem. Ro neged penechem. So Rashi cites the Midrash that Paro said that Paro was an expert astrologer, and he had seen that there's a star called Ra, which represents bloodshed, killing, and you people are going to die in the midbar. And Rashi cites the Chazal that Hashem converted the blood of Hariga, the blood which represents bloodshed, to Dam Milah. Because we find that Yeshua, that when the Jews came to Gilgal, before they brought the Korban Pesach, which they hadn't brought all the years, because a person is not permitted to bring the Korban Pesach unless he's circumcised. So the Jews during the 40 years or 39 years, they were not circumcised in the desert. And that was the first time they were circumcised. That was the Dam Milah. So Hashem Hofach, he converted the Dam Harigel, Dam Milah. That's Rashi. Verbatim. So we asked the question, I mean, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu have to convert the Dam Harigel, Dam Milah? Hashem could have said, there's not going to be bloodshed. He split the sea. The sea is meant to flow horizontally, but if Hashem says it's going to flow vertically, it flows vertically. And that's the reason why it says in Chazal that all the nations of the world saw Kriyas Yamsuf, because the water had soared literally thousands and thousands of feet as a straight wall. So as far as you were from the Yamsuf, you were able to see the splitting of the sea. Besides, Rashi cites in this week's Parsha that when the sea split, everybody in water in the world split. It wasn't only the Yamsuf split, everybody, the water split, even water in a vessel split. Then everybody should be aware that Kriyas Yamsuf took place at the time. That's Chazal. So that's the question we asked. Why did Hashem have to convert the Dam, which represent Hariga, Dam Milah? Hashem should said it's not going to be. So we mentioned the Maral, that the Maral goes and says, explains, the Ramban asks a question, Hashem promises Avram the land of Canaan, so on and so forth. So Avram says to Hashem, what's it all worth? I have no child. The administrator of my household is going to be my heir. So Hashem says, no. The issue of your loins will be your heir. And it says, he took him out and told him to look at the heaven. Your children will be like the stars of the heaven. So Rashi over there cites Chazal that Avram had said, but Avram was an expert stargazer. And he says, but the stars say, Avram ein lo ben. So how could I have a child? So Hashem says, you will have a child. You will have a son. And the Torah tells us, Vayamein, Avram believed, Vayashrev lo l'tzedakah. That he believed when Hashem said that he was going to have a child, he accepted it as fact. It was considered righteousness. So the Ramban asks, a person who never witnessed the miracle, you could say that you accepted it as fact, it's righteousness. Avram came out of Ur Kasdim. Avram went into the kiln. He personally experienced something which is impossible to happen. He went into the fire, came out of the fire. So a person who experiences such a miracle, why for that person, believing that Hashem will give him a child, although his wife is barren, why is that considered righteousness if you believe such a thing? He personally witnessed it himself. So Ramban answers whatever he answers, but the Maral says a principle, very fundamental principle, that although Avram experienced a miracle on the terrestrial level, as mentioned before, because the Ur Kasdim was on the terrestrial level, but what happens on the terrestrial level has no relevance to what happens on the celestial level. Why? Because what is existence? Our experience of every moment of our lives. There's always continuous change. There's transition. We have seasons. We transition from season to season. We eat, we digest, we expel and eat, we sleep, we're awake, we work, we're born, we develop into adolescence, into adulthood, mid-age, and the person dies. All existence is movement. There's always movement. It's not one thing. There's continued this change. Miracle, what's a ness? It's a more extreme level of miracle. It's this, it's something else. It's just more extreme. That is the reality of the world. That's terrestrial. Celestial, the heavenly bodies are what they are. There's no change in them. The sun is the sun, the moon is the moon, the stars are the stars. There's no change. As a result of that, for change to take place in the heavenly bodies, that we don't find. So Avram is being the expert astrologer, stargaze, he sees in the stars, what does it say? Avram ain't lo ben. Avram's not going to have a son. So Hashem says it's true. Avram ain't lo ben. Avraham yesh lo ben. So Hashem there didn't say he's just ignoring the stars. He converted it. He says, Avram, it's true, Avram, but Avraham is a different being. You're no longer that same person. That's the only reason why it could have happened. But to say, despite the stars saying Avram ain't lo ben, Avram will have a son, it's not possible. Because the way God created the world, in the heavenly bodies, there's no change. As a result of that, I explained, if Paro saw in the stars, Ra, which represents bloodshed, that means there has to be blood. The Gemara tells us, David says in Tehillim, every day we die for you. So the Gemara says that's referring to Milah. That we circumcise our child, you take a newborn child and you cut him, and there's blood. It's like we're willing to be killed for Hashem every day. That's Alecho Ragnu Kol Hayom. Something just came to mind, which I'll tell you afterwards as I'm talking. So therefore, that's why it had to be converted. They couldn't just be ignored, but rather the Dam Hariga was converted to Dam Milah. Okay? So I said parts of this already in the past. So all of a sudden, what struck me, the Gemara tells us in Yevamis, why did they not circumcise themselves for 40 years? Because for the blood to clot, you need a ruach tzvonis. You have to have a northerly wind blowing. And the northerly wind that blows for 40 years did not blow. Stop blowing. As a result of the Chet Egel. Stop blowing. As a result of that, if they would have circumcised themselves, they would have bled to death. So therefore, the Jews were not able to circumcise themselves after the Chet Egel. So if you can't circumcise yourself, you can't bring the Korban Pesach. So I mentioned there are only two mitzvahs aseh. Every transgression which carries liability of koros is always a negative commandment. The two positive commandments that if you remain passive and you're not proactive to do them, you have a liability of koros. What are they? That's Milah, circumcision, and Korban Pesach. Though, so evidently, if they're so vital that they carry the liability of koros, evidently they're very important mitzvahs. Although it's mitzvahs aseh, Pesach and Milah. For 40 years, we weren't able to bring the Korban Pesach, and we weren't able to circumcise ourselves because of the circumstance that since the northerly wind didn't blow, we couldn't circumcise ourselves because it was a question of pikuach nefesh. We would bleed to death. As a result of that, I'm being uncircumcised. We couldn't bring the Korban Pesach. Okay, that's the reality. I asked the question. I mean, if there's such vital mitzvahs, we sin with the Chet Egel. We should what? Hashem should allow the northerly wind to blow so we could circumcise ourselves to do this important mitzvah, which is the bris, and we should bring the Korban Pesach. But yet Hashem, as a result of the Chet Egel, had the wind stop blowing, and we were held up on these two levels. No Milah, no Korban Pesach. Why? What's the reason? Now, when Moshe Rabbeinu said to Hashem, Lo ben Yomer Mitzrayim, Berohu Tziyam, that's Rashi. Why? When he prayed, Hashem originally said, "By the Chet Egel, I will destroy them," which was the bloodshed. So what did Moshe say? What was the basis for his supplication? Lomu Yomru Mitzrayim Berohu Tziyam. Egypt is going to say that just confirms what they originally said. Hashem took them out for bloodshed, to kill them. It's Chil Hashem. As a result of that, what did Hashem do? He said, it's not going to be bloodshed, it's going to be Dam Milah. Okay? But that was the supplication, the state execution, that there should not be Hariga, it should be Dam Milah. Okay? If that's the case, the wind has to stop blowing. Why does that stop blowing? You're not going to circumcise yourselves. You're not going to be in the Korban Pesach. You know why? Because after 40 years, all the Jews that were born, and there's the new generation, the old generation who was circumcised, they all passed away. Anybody above the age of 20 who left Egypt, who was circumcised, who brought the Korban Pesach, after that, there was no longer Milah, there was no longer Korban Pesach. Why? Because you needed that level of blood that after 40 years, we needed that blood, that there were rivers, as it says in Chazal, there were rivers of blood. You have hundreds of millions of people circumcising themselves. There's blood, rivers of blood, and there's foreskins. So that was a chesed. That Hashem withdrew the northerly wind was so we should have that blood, so we should be able to convert the Dam Hariga, the blood of bloodshed, into the Dam Milah. That's the reason. If Paro wouldn't have been the expert astrologer, what would have been? It would have been Chil Hashem if we would have been killed. It's only because Paro was so raw in the star, it said bloodshed, therefore it had to be converted to Dam Milah. As a result of that, we were able to survive. But if, let's say, Paro wouldn't have seen the raw, we would have been circumcised. So what would have been the Dam Hariga? The only reason is because to be a Chil Hashem, unless it's somehow converted to something else. But if there's no Chil Hashem, there's no reason to convert it. The Jews would have continued circumcising themselves. As a result of that's why Hashem withdrew the northerly wind, that we should not be able to circumcise ourselves, that ultimately the conversion of Ra should go from Dam Hariga to Dam Milah. The Beis Halevi, on the beginning of the first word, Vahi b'shalach Paro Sa'om, the Medrash says, what's Vahi b'shalach? The word Vai in Hebrew means woe. Woe that Paro sent out the people at this point. Why woe? Because the Medrash says, Hashem says, I only inflicted upon the Egyptians 10 plagues. If I would have been able to keep them longer, the Jews in Egypt, I would have brought more plagues upon them. But woe to me, woe that I couldn't keep them longer because they had to leave at that point. Like it says, if we would have stayed a moment longer, we would have gone into the oblivion. We had to leave. So Hashem said, woe that I had to take them out, because otherwise I would have brought more plagues upon the Egyptians. And the Medrash explains, what is it analogous to? That a person had kidnapped the prince and had tortured the prince, and then they found the culprit, and the king says, give the man 100 lashes, 1,000 lashes. And as they're whipping him, he dies under the whip. And they didn't even get near the number that the king had decreed that he should have that many lashes. So the king says, woe, that the culprit died under the whip, because if he would have lived longer, I would have given more lashes. Similarly here, if the Jews could have stayed longer in Egypt, Hashem would have brought more plagues upon the Egyptians. So the Beis Halevi asks a question. David Mel says, "V'rachma v'kol masav." Hashem has mercies upon all his creation. What Hashem is bemoaning the fact he couldn't keep them longer, that he would have give greater level of suffering on the Egyptians. What is the value of that? So he goes to show, and he quotes Psukim, that why did the Chet Egel take place? This is very important. Why did the Chet Egel take place? Because he says every makkah that came upon the Egyptians had a dual purpose. We know that the Makos in Egypt were what? Were Nisim Gluyim. They revealed miracles. And there's a question, how many miracles happened in Egypt? That's the discussion we have in the Agora, which we speak about. Was each Mak in Egypt, was it 4? Was it 5? And we may do the numbers. It was Etzbe Elokim. So there were multiple miracles within each miracle, revealed miracles. The Jews initially were idolaters. They did not believe in divine providence, that Hashem is still involved, as we mentioned in the Ramban. The miracles revealed that Hashem is orchestrating every aspect of creation and gives us an understanding that even Teva, even nature, is miracle. But it's not obvious. So the more they saw the hand of Hashem, every plague, whatever belief they had of idolatry, it was literally being stripped away. Every plague was was part of the purging process. We were being expunged from that impurity of idolatry, because the more we understood the baselessness for that position. But you know something, we didn't see enough. 10 wasn't sufficient. And there was a certain, like, microscopic cell of idolatry left in us, of lack of belief. And as a result of that, he shows from Psukim, that's why when push came to shove at Sinai, when we believed Moshe was no longer alive, they fell back to that original belief. It was reactivated. Because initially they were idolaters, but if they wouldn't fully purged and there wouldn't have been a trace of that idolatry, the Chet Egel would have never happened. So therefore, that was the Makos. The Jews were being rehabilitated. Every Makkah advanced us another level of understanding. We could internalize that reality to our core, and simultaneously the Egyptians were being punished. But now that it doesn't have that value any longer, that the Jews can't be beneficiaries because they have to leave, because we're holding at the Mem Teshari Tumah, at the lowest level of impurity, we have to leave. Therefore, Hashem couldn't bring more plagues on the Egyptians. That's Vaisha Shalach. Woe that I had to send them out, had no choice, because the Jews wouldn't have survived it. Therefore, woe that I couldn't bring more plagues on the Egyptians. That's the Beis Halevi, how he explains this midrash of Vai. Woe. That Hashem is bemoaning the fact that we couldn't be exposed to greater levels. But it's interesting. At the Yam Suf, there's an argument, maybe there were 250 miracles we saw. With everything said and done, that what happened in Egypt had that limitation of 10 and no more. As a result of that, despite everything that followed, the splitting of the sea, Morah, the man, the bear, these were all miracles. It still wasn't enough to fully cleanse us and purge us of that impurity, what Egypt had put into us as a result of that experience. And he shows from Psukim that at the end of time, Egypt will be decimated because of what they did to Klal Yisrael. There's not going to be a trace of Egypt in the future because they had enslaved us and we became idolaters. That's the past. So he goes to explain, no, the only reason why it was a Chet Egel. We reached a level that the world was ready to reach its level of perfection. But because of Chet Egel, we had this reversal. And we went back to post-sin. But who was the cause of that? The ones who were the cause of that were the Egyptians, because they enslaved us, and as a result of that, we became idolaters. Just to mention a medrash, the Malachim had said, Elo of the Avodah Zarah, Elo of the Avodah Zarah, as we were passing through the Yam Suf. Because when we read the word, it says, the water was a wall to the right and to the left. So the word choma is written with the vav deleted. So without the vowels, it could be read chema. Chema, the wrath. The wrath of Hashem was to right and to the left. What does that mean? So Rashi cites Chazal that the Malachim came with a claim. Why are you killing the Egyptians? Because they were idolaters. The Jews are the same idolaters. So Hashem answers, but the difference is the Egyptians were idolaters being Rotzo. They chose to be idolaters. The Jews, because they were the chattels of the Egyptians, the level of influence of the master over a slave, it's almost not possible not to succumb to those influences. So therefore, the Jews are ba'ones. It's something that was beyond their ability that they shouldn't have that level of influence because they were in a state of slavery. Therefore, they don't have that culpability. But nevertheless, that was the claim of the Midas Adin. They're over there with the Zorah. But what? Uzbonis, that's Hashem's sons, but it doesn't change the reality. The reality is we weren't fully purged because we only saw 10 revealed miracles, whatever those 10 miracles were, and therefore it wasn't a complete purification of what we experienced in Egypt. So it's interesting. Levi was the only Shevet did not participate in the Chet Egel. Levi didn't even have even a trace of idolatry because they were never involved, because the Levium were never enslaved. Therefore, they weren't subject to that level of what? Of influence. They were just to the contrary. They were the representation of Hashem's presence. Therefore, Milah Hashem Elai, when Moshe Rabbeinu says, who's for God should be with me, it was only Shevet Levi. Every member of Shevet Levi was there to what? To bring about the Kiddush Hashem. And all the idolaters were killed. The others died in the plague, whatever happened over there. But Levi was not subject because they didn't have that impurity as a result of being slaves. They were never over there for the Zorah. They traveled from Sukkos and they camped in Esom at the edge of the desert. So Rashi says, the first day, they traveled 130 miles. Could you imagine millions of people? It was a miracle. They gathered instantaneously and they were transported 130 miles. That was the first day. The second day, they went from Ramses to Sukkos. Hashem holech lifneim is very important. Hashem holech lifneim yomam ba'amud onon lantchosem aderech. Hashem went before them during the daytime with a pillar of cloud to show them the way, to lead them on the way. V'layla b'amuresh, and at nighttime with a pillar of fire, loher lohem, to illuminate, to bring illumination for them. So they should be able to travel day and night. During the day, they had the cloud, and nighttime they had this pillar of fire which illuminated the way. Lo yomish amud ha'onon yomam v'amuresh ha'loylo. The pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire did not remove itself. Lifneom, continuous. And Rashi explains that as one was going out, the other one was there immediately. There wasn't a moment that it wasn't obvious the cloud was leading them. Either it was a pillar of cloud or was a pillar of fire. The Medrash says something interesting. As I mentioned, the whole world knew about Kriyas Yamsuf. When the Jews left Egypt, did the whole world know about it? At least the civilized world. So the Medrash says that pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire, the world never saw such a thing. When Hashem went before the Klal Yisrael with a pillar of fire, the whole world saw that pillar of fire. Everyone. But why did Hashem go with the pillar of fire? What was the value? He could have had other means, other ways to show them the way. But Hashem himself, the creator of the world, which was shown through the 10 plagues, he himself led them out of Egypt and showed them the way. Why? To show the world who the Jews are. They are the equivalent of his children. The world was created on their behalf. That's what he wanted to show the world. Who are the Jewish people? So the Medrash says, not only did they not appreciate what happened to treat us with this level of reverence and respect and awe, they go and they kill us. To the contrary, despite the fact it's something which is irrefutably stated, that the Creator himself led the Jewish people, which confirms who they are, how special they are. Not only did they not revere us and respect us and accept us who we were, they go and they kill us. So as a result, there's a greater claim against the nations of the world because of this. The Gemara tells us in Sukkah we bring 70 bulls over to Sukkot, right? I am pouring the 70 oxen or bulls that are brought over. Who are they for? It's for the 70 nations of the world. That all the bracha that comes to the nations of the world comes about due to those 70 karbonos, bulls, which we bring, represent each one of the 70 root nations. On Shmini Atzeres, there's one parechod that represents Klal Yisrael, but the 7 corresponds to the 70 root nations. All the bracha that they receive comes due to that. So what was the value of the Beis HaMikdash for the nations of the world? That was the source of the bracha. If the nations of the world would have appreciated what the Beis HaMikdash was, they would have encircled it with legions of soldiers to protect it. Because that's the nest egg. Everything emanates from there. So Rabbi Yochanan says not only did they not protect it, they went and destroyed it, despite that fact. So they'd say because they didn't have an appreciation, they didn't attribute that. But here, there was no question. Hashem intentionally was Ba'amur Eish Laila, that the world saw it and it couldn't be denied. So if it couldn't be denied, how do you mistreat the Jews the way you mistreated the Jews? Therefore, the claim against the world is what cannot be responded to. It's going to be the condemnation for the nations of the world. You know, the Gemara tells us in Zvachim, this is next week in Parshas Yisro, that at the time of Kabbalas Torah, the world was quaking. And all the nations of the world come to Bilam, who was their prophet, and they say to Bilam, the world is coming to an end. What should we do? Because, as it says, by Kabbalas Torah, Hashem brought heaven to earth. And the earth didn't have the capacity to receive Hashem's presence, so the world was quaking. And they thought everything was coming to an end. So they said to Bilam, Hashem is destroying the world. Bilam says to them, it's not happening. Because Hashem made a covenant, he's not going to destroy the world after the great flood. So they say to him, to Bilam, but maybe that's with water, but maybe he's destroying the world with fire. So Bilam says, don't you realize what kind of fools you are? Don't you realize Hashem Oslamu Yitain, that Hashem is giving his power to the Jewish people, meaning the Torah? So they concluded, Hashem Yivorech Samav Shalom. Hashem should bless his people with peace. But what did they do? They said, we're out of here. We're back to the Baal Peor. We're back to all this other stuff. I mean, if they had such a level of clarity, they saw what it meant that God comes to earth to give his Torah to the Jewish people. Don't you think everyone should have immediately embraced monotheism? Even though you're not a Jew, but be a monotheist. We're going back to idolatry. We're going back to our old ways. How? What's it all about? With such a level of clarity, because as we discussed, they believed, it's true, God is a power. He's more powerful, but he's not the ultimate power. So if you accept him to be your deity, so-called, so then you're bound to what he says. Therefore, the Jews, what? If they cross the line, he reigns in on them. We're not part of his civilization. We're a different existence. Therefore, we go back to the idolatry. We have our deities, they have their deity. That deity is the one who took them out of Egypt, this and that, whatever it is. We have no relevance to that. He offered us the Torah to become part of his clan, so to say. We're not interested. The Jews grabbed it, embraced it. But they didn't accept Hashem to be the ultimate. Everything only emanates from his will, that he wills everything. They never came to that level of realization. Only Jews had that understanding. That everything's only a manifestation of Hashem's will. The sun, the moon, whatever the power may be.